Good afternoon, fourth grade. Today we're going to continue reading in our American Revolution text, and we are going to learn about the Battle of Breeds Hill and Boston. But before we get started, we have a quick write. It says, describe a time when you had a misunderstanding with someone. What happened and what did you do to fix it? Press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready for the focus question. Our focus question for today is why is Breeds Hill significant and how did the rebels gain control of Boston? Our vocabulary words are evacuate. That's when you leave a place because of danger. So we would draw a line to this picture. Our second word is siege, and that is another word for a military battle. So you would draw a line to this picture. And then the last one is fortification, and that's when you build a wall around a city or around a place to keep people from attacking you, to protect your city. So you draw a line to this picture. Go ahead and turn the page, and before we begin reading, remember we have a nonfiction text, so we're going to ask a how or why question about the title. And there are two how or why questions you could ask. The first one is why was Breeds Hill important? And the second one is how did the rebels take over Boston? Press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready to read. Let's get started reading at the top of the page. On June 16th, 1775, hundreds of American militiamen dug fortifications on Breeds Hill in the Charlestown Peninsula across the Charles River from Boston. The orders were to take nearby Bunker Hill, but rebel General Israel Putnam mistakenly seized Breeds Hill. General Gage's redcoat regiments rode across to attack, but were pushed back twice before driving out the rebels. 2 weeks later, General George Washington arrived to take command of the siege. In October, Gage was replaced with General William Howe. Late that winter, American artillery officer Henry Knox brought captured cannon to Washington, who aimed them at Boston. Howe had no choice but to evacuate the city. So if we go back in our text and we're thinking about how the rebels ended up taking over Boston, we know that first that they seized Breeds Hill, which was across the river from Boston. And then when General George Washington arrived, they received these cannons from reinforcement, and they were able to fire the cannons at Boston, and that is when the British soldiers left. So in 1B, we would write down, the rebels wanted to gain control of Bunker Hill in order to drive the redcoats out of Boston. The rebels accidentally took Breeds Hill, but once Washington took over the siege, the redcoats were forced to leave Boston. Press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready for number 2. It says, why did the rebels want to take Bunker Hill? And if we go back in our text, it tells us that they dug fortifications at Breeds Hill on the Charlestown Peninsula across the Charles River from Boston. So they wanted to take Bunker Hill because it was across the river from Boston, and that would put them in a position to then take over Boston. So in 2A, we would write, the rebels wanted to take Bunker Hill because it was across the river from Boston. Press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready for 2B. It says, why would the rebels want to be across the river from Boston? And if you are in a battle, you can look at this picture over here. If you're in a battle, if there's a river between you, that kind of serves as your protection. And if you're firing into cannons into the other city, it forces the army that's in that city to retreat or to flee. And so in 2B, we would write, Boston was the largest town under control of the British. The rebels want control of the city, and being across the river put them in a good position to drive out the British. Press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready for 3A. It says, how did the Redcoats respond to the rebel fortifications on Breed's Hill? So if we go back in our text to where the American militiamen fortified Breed's Hill, if we keep reading, we know that General Gage's Redcoat regiments rode across to attack them, and they ended up driving out the rebels, which means that General Gage's British army rode across the river and they ended up beating the rebels. So in 2A, we would say they responded by rowing across the Charles River to attack the rebels. Press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready for 3B. It says, why did George Washington go to Breed's Hill? And if we go back into our text, the rebels lost at Breed's Hill. The rebels, or the American militiamen, they lost at Breed's Hill. And so George Washington came to take over command of the American army because they had lost. And so in 3B, we would say the Redcoats had succeeded at pushing back the rebels, which means that the rebels were losing. George Washington probably came because he was known as a great commander and the rebels needed support. Press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready for box 4. It says, what does the phrase Washington arrived to take command of the siege mean? So if we go back in this text, we know that siege means battle, and we know that the American soldiers or the rebels had just lost. And so if Washington arrived to take command of the siege, that means that Washington arrived to take over leading the American army. So in 4A, we would write, this means that George Washington came to take over command of the Patriots. He was not in charge of trying to get the British army. He was now in charge, of trying to get the British army to surrender in Boston. Press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready for 4B. It says, why was George Washington successful? And if we go back in our text, it says that Henry Knox brought captured cannon to Washington, and they aimed the cannons at Boston, and that is when the British evacuated. And so in 4B, we would say, Washington ordered his soldiers to aim cannons at Boston. The Loyalist General Howe was forced to evacuate Boston or get shot by cannons and die. Press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready for the paragraph. The paragraph states, why were the fortifications on Breed's Hill important? And if you go back, you can use your main idea as the topic sentence, and then you can use just box 4 about how the battle ended to support your answer.